Alright, so today's documentary is Space is a Liquid, Not a Vacuum. And there's several key reasons why this is more and more possible. And I'm just going to enlighten you with a couple ideas before I show you why everybody says that this is why, or at least one of the reasons why, the whole idea behind space travel and everything else is being hidden. Not to mention that they lied to us once again and flipped the situation. I was going to put this up a few weeks ago, and I did not know how to approach you in this idea. And it came to me that large amounts of anything cannot possibly be a vacuum. There must be a texture to it. There must be viscosity to it. There must be some kind of natural dynamics to it. When a baby is born, it has amniotic fluid. It grows inside a woman for a certain amount of time. That is natural. Inside a cell or inside a molecule, we often find liquid. I can't say all the time because I know that there's probably one or two major scenarios I cannot account for. Every time we think of something, we always have an idea that the particles are nearly right next to each other. Whether it be a gas, a liquid, or a solid. That is why it's hard to believe that any open area is filled with a void of a vacuum, because there is nothing to contain that vacuum. There is nothing there that would give pressure to create a vacuum. Everything natural that I can think of, from the tiniest atoms to the largest molecules, have some kind of fluid and or superfluid that help it bond, pair bond, and move through its general functions. And I actually have some quite fantastic sources that are saying that space-time is now being considered a superfluid. So if a function of space is being called a superfluid, then the general openness of the function must be, at some point or another, a superfluid. And this discovery, I think, is as old as it can be. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again, I believe beyond any reasonable doubt that we can get through the firmament. And I can almost guarantee you that this concept is nearly the right course. I don't have any reason as to why they chose to say it was a vacuum in the first place, but I just know in order to create a vacuum, you must have a container of space that can be pressurized into being a vacuum where it's void of everything. And I cannot begin to believe that with all the openness outer space, quote unquote, is supposed to contain, that with everything I know naturally occurring in some relative liquid form, that there must be something that we're not learning. And that idea is that space is a liquid, not a vacuum. I know this to be nearly true because of all the natural sciences I can name. And I will go into saying that I was going to put this up several weeks ago, but I was just watching a Big Bang Theory episode, and I know that that is impossibly the worst concept I can name, but they brought up an idea that space-time is a hydrogen-based superfluid where the viscosity is very low. Now, that stuff actors are paid to say and everything else, and I don't believe it's a hydrogen base, but I could be wrong in terms of general space being a fluid. But I do believe it to be a fluid, and I do believe the viscosity to be relatively low. These images I found online, they will be sourced as I found them. As you can see, the ones where we're supposed to be in space, it looks like they're in water, and I often wondered why that was. I often wondered how could it possibly be that water is a best superfluid or a best design for them to train in if they're going to be in a near void of everything. And I thought that can't be possible. If they're going to be in a near void, their best places to train would be in the highest areas of the world and not pools, lakes, oceans, and other places where these astronauts have been seen to do their training. Now, we've all seen the videos where astronauts are supposedly have issues where, whether it's a training scenario, doing a live feed, I don't know, but where bubbles have been seen in real time, quote unquote, when they were supposed to be in space. Now, this is not exactly the hardest thing to say. Well, you know, they were training and they decided to do something live and there was a miscalculation and we saw bubbles. Fine. Okay. I'll believe it. But more and more of what we're being told is that it is, in fact, a superfluid. I would actually use a term hyperfluid. Because I don't think super really does the job. Because what hyper means is multi-dimensional, multifaceted, multifunction. Super just means great or grand, and like all other things, almost magical. So, this is why I believe space is a liquid, not a vacuum, because in a vacuum, folks, you have to have something that contains the vacuum, that pressurizes it, and there's nothing to give pressure in an area of no pressure. Therefore, the atoms would be collating together, bouncing off each other. A gas wouldn't work. So the closest thing to that would be some kind of hyperfluid. They call it superfluid, so we'll use the term interchangeably. But I truly believe that it is, in fact, a liquid of some kind. Now, I was going to do one video where I would compare all the major fluids found on Earth inside all different cells and all physical dimensions that we can name, and in all pressures and everything else. I was going to do that, and I'll do that one on a 2.0 basis of this one, to say what exactly kind of fluid space might actually be. I'm not convinced it's actually a water base. I'm not convinced it would be a hard water base or a soft water base. The difference between being what we make atom bombs with and what we fill a swimming pool with. But I do believe that space is in fact a liquid. Now, I told you the way they leaked is that space-time is a super liquid, or as I want to call it, a hyper liquid. Now, if it is a hyper liquid or a super liquid, then that means viscosity is either very high or very low, depending on what actual things make up the liquid, molecules, bacterium, etc. Now, I want to show you this because this is actually coming from the time.uk. Space theory universe is a liquid, claims scientists. So, it's actually of the conspiracy realm, folks. And it is actually hitting the general sciences. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, the mainstream media and pretty soon probably the general people. So the universe should be regarded as a liquid, quote-unquote, superfluid, claim scientists seeking to discover the fundamental nature of science. Now, as always, they throw in somebody you would recognize, Machio Kaku, but he has absolutely nothing to do with this. Quantum mechanics is currently able to explain 3 of the 4 fundamental forces of the universe: electromagnetism, strong interaction, and weak interaction, which is electromagnetism. It does not explain gravity. We've already gone over the gravity thing. It is a form of electromagnetism, but it has not yet worked into the general population of sciences. So basically, according to researchers and Stefano Liberti, a professor of International School of Advanced Studies, CISA, a research scientist at the Ludwig Maximum University in Munich, the medium they move through, or universe, could be considered a superfluid. Oh, my bad. So basically the idea is taking space-time, which appears as a classical object, and moving it to a visible specific fluid. Oddly enough, ladies and gentlemen, they are mentioning it, they are kind of leaking H2O being the superfluid or superfluid base. Now I find that weird because the scientists are always in pools and stuff training, and I think it to be a weak version of water. Honestly, no holds barred. I truly believe that to be the case. Now, that's coming from IB, folks. This is not, something that someone is just coming out and saying. This is actually true. And if they're saying that space-time is a liquid, then that would mean general space as we know it has to be a liquid as well. a medium between the mediums, if you will. And what is a medium in physics, in chemistry? A liquid. That is why I've almost always believed that space is not really cold. I don't imagine it to be very warm, but I don't exactly believe it to be surprisingly super cold. Now, I haven't looked at the generalness of it, but here's another big article. This coming from physics.org, another mainstream media leak. Liquid space-time, a slippery superfluid that's what space-time could be like. So they're trying to leak space-time and space together. Remember, they got to give you a theory and then strip it for the facts. Space-time becomes space. Liquid is the identifying marker that they're trying to find out whether or not you are going to believe it. So what if space-time or space were a kind of fluid? The question was asked and tackled by theoretical physicists working on quantum gravity by creating models attempting to reconcile gravity, quantum mechanics. They use the Planck scale, among others, yada yada yada. But there's theoretical framework that suggests space-time should be treated as a fluid. So I'll leave it there. And basically they just go on to say the same thing that the last page basically said. With the continuation of the idea that the viscosity value should be extremely low, almost considered zero. So that means flip that and it's relatively high, something we can probably figure out, something very similar to, I don't know, water, let's say. I don't know what the viscosity value of water is. I'm not even going to try to put a number on it because it's been a long time since I've worked with viscosity and even know what units I would even be measuring in because it's been that long. But this is actually coming to light, and most people are saying the reason this is being leaked is because most people want to put it out there and say that when they say space-time, they're trying to leak space as a liquid. And how better than to say some dimension grander than we can imagine is a liquid, and then them basically testing it when they're really trying to say that space is a liquid. I find that to be very interesting indeed. And I can't believe this myself, but to be honest, I can't believe it not to be nearly true. I think that every major orbiting body does have an atmosphere of some kind, which kind of does act as intermediate levels. Whereas if you did land on the moon, it would be relatively, atmospheric, keeping the water out or the superfluid out. Because I'm not totally convinced that we're living in a giant ocean. Although, if we were, guess what? That goes back to the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, and many of the holy books, which say that there's water above the firmament and below the firmament. I'm telling you, folks, the more and more you read into this stuff, the more and more those books got it right. You can say all the wishy-washy stories you want about 10,000 years ago, 25,000 years ago, and how Noah did not have the dinosaurs on his ark, among others. Fine, that's cool. I don't read into it for the stories. Even if they do go back to pre-Sumerian eras. So I'm looking at this from pure facts, ladies and gentlemen. Absolutely pure facts. Space is a liquid, not a vacuum. And the very fact that science is trying to leak that space-time is a superfluid, or as I would call it, a hyperfluid, then that would mean a function of that function, which is the grandeur of the two being the openness of the two, would be considered a base fluid for that super or hyperfluid, which makes water almost seem like a predictable fluid. Now, I don't want to say that it is water because I have absolutely no basis for that. I will do a 2.0 video on this in a couple coming weeks. And I want to actually get about 100 different different mediums involved, from insides of different cells to liquids found in neutrinos or any type of physics related work, and come up with these superfluids that exist in those. And most of them are not going to have that because we haven't discovered that, or it's being overlooked at this point, because the viscosity and the atomic weight of those and everything else are becoming the sciences that you need supercomputers to engineer just to figure out the wave patterns, just to say yes, that has some kind of fluid in it or is fluid based. Well, even light is fluid based, folks, because it has particle and wave form. So if light has particle and wave form, and wave is a product of a liquid, and we see light, then we technically see in liquid, which we know. I mean, everything kind of goes back to a medium form existing inside the outerness of our own planet. And I can guarantee you almost exactly, space is a liquid, not a vacuum, because it makes so much more sense. Every organic material on the planet basically has some kind of a base liquid that everything grows in, everything nurtures in. Why should planets, moons, and everything else be any different if it is naturally based? Why? Because it's larger? Where everything is larger on some scale or another, and then it goes back to small. It's a cycle. And I'll do a video on that at some point, because I truly believe that to be true. And I believe that hopefully someday very soon, well, probably nearing my death, there will be a scientist that will be able to look into a microscope and see himself looking into a microscope by going through the atoms, finding the dimensional loopholes, somehow or another finding the planet, finding himself looking through the microscope. And I truly believe that is possible. If you can think it, it is possible. And to be honest, there's absolutely no basis for how a vacuum would even operate inside outer space. I mean, it would have to be pressurized. What holds pressure if you're floating around in nothingness? There is nothing. Therefore, you flip it and a liquid makes a whole lot more sense. Now, we'd have to come to the conclusion that they can actually go into space. I think they can, but I don't think our space agencies are designed to do that. I think there are secret space agencies, which we all know they exist, which have higher technology that can. And I almost guarantee this is absolutely the facts, because it makes unimaginable differences. absolutely unimaginable differences. I mean, practically anything you can think of that is made in nature comes from a liquid at some point. So why wouldn't there be a liquid base to the universe around us? A superfluid, a hyperfluid. I mean, there's regular water, there's heavy water. Why wouldn't there be a light water? I'm not even so sure water would be something that we would discuss here. But we would need something that connects everything. Hydrogen is a good connector. And something that bonds well. Oxygen bonds well. But there are other chemicals, other things that we don't know that should be better. Could be a methane base, could be a lithium base, could be a carbon hydrogen base that we don't know of. But everything basically comes down to saying that the religious books are right. There's water above the firmament and below the firmament. And I'll be honest, folks, until I started seeing how they're pushing this space-time liquid deal, I thought they were all crazy. And then the training in the pools made more sense. The bubbles made more sense. And the reason they won't show space makes a lot of sense. So I have to say that the more and more I look into this, the more and more space is a liquid, not a vacuum, even if its viscosity is nearing zero. And at that point, space travel is theoretically almost certainly possible at hyperspeeds far beyond what we can achieve in our atmosphere, because you can push on that element harder than you can our open atmosphere. And now you have jets that, with the right technology, can nuclear pulse or ion pulse something 100,000 miles an hour in a few seconds, because the difference between a vacuum and a liquid is nearly 1,000%, even if the viscosity is low. Now you have ideas that are coming together, and you say, now it's possible to reach Alpha Centauri, if there is an Alpha Centauri, within minutes, within days, within weeks, within hours, within seconds. Because the vacuum idea is gone. And I have to believe, beyond anything, folks, the vacuum doesn't make sense because you need something to surround it to pressurize it. Well, if we're talking about the void of space, then there is nothing to pressurize it, therefore it cannot be a vacuum. Therefore it must be a hyperfluid, a superfluid of some kind. And at that point, everything else kind of goes out the window that we've been told. Now, I don't know why we don't see, crazy looking fish swimming by the planet and all kinds of weird things. I have no idea what types of things, such as magnetic fields and other things, keep life forms from actually existing in the pureness of that liquid. But I can almost imagine that they do exist And that is why we now see the UFOs speeding across thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of times faster, and we think they're moving inside a vacuum or a void. And truth be it, they're moving inside a hyperfluid or a superfluid that now they can move through because of a new pulse engine or a new electromagnetic quantum technology. Now, even time travel, dimensional travel, becomes nearing the possibility because now you have a medium that has a medium base to work with. Now you can take electromagnets like CERN and other places and tweak those to a certain point to bring that liquid to a pressure to open up voids to go through. Now it doesn't look so impossible. It actually starts to look like everybody now has the right idea. Now this is actually quite impressive, and I'm very happy to bring you this. And I think this is closer to the reality than we've ever been told. And I think they're trying to leak it through the idea of space-time. Because remember, they can't just come out and tell us, oh, we found out that, this is so. They need to throw an idea halfway out there and see how everybody reacts and make sure they don't just, go into a frenzy where they're all burning down the villages for the local monsters and stuff. They need to break the cycle nice and easy, and how do they do that? With general theories that they can laugh off as a joke if everybody gets too serious about it. Now, I know a guy who has an aerospace engineering degree, and I would love to have had him in on this because I know he'd be laughing me off right now saying, that's impossible. We have been told it's a vacuum. And the construct of a vacuum, ladies and gentlemen, is an absolute void which exists between bodies. Well, what creates the pressure for those bodies? You're not going to get it because it's a fluid. It's a dynamic intermediate. Maybe the viscosity is almost zero, but it is in fact a fluid. And there would have to be a medium in between. And that medium in between would be some kind of super or hyperfluid. Super hyperfluid. Or a medium between the super, between the hyper, between the high and the low. I'm not going to say it's all water because I don't believe that. I'm not going to say that it's not because, I'll be honest, it says it in the Bible. And as much as I probably go on daily going, oh my God, please don't be talking about the Bible. Please don't be doing this. Please don't be doing that. I hate to tell you this, ladies and gentlemen. There's a lot more information in those books if you read them as a collection than if you read it as one person's interpretation versus another. And those people, ladies and gentlemen, knew the difference between a ball and a circle. Those people knew the difference between a liquid, a solid, and a gas. They weren't stupid. In fact, most of what we know today, they were laughing about then. So I can only part with you telling you space is a liquid, not a vacuum, and it almost all makes sense if you think about everything in nature. Thank you.